What if imagination was a finite resource like oil or gold, but renewed itself like trees can? So, that was the start of a Twitter exchange that I had that went back and forth for a little while. And from that little seed, an entire tree has bloomed from it. So, I'm going to go back and forth here with how the Twitter exchange played out. So I'm going to go back to where I started. What if imagination was a finite resource like oil or gold, but renewed itself like trees can? And the entities that run the world, like corporations or universities, bureaucracies, they all knew this. It would be in their best interest to burn up as much imagination as possible, so there is only a limited amount of imagination resource left, so they could control the amount of change that happens in the world through technology or technological advances. That's why you still drive around in a car designed 100 years ago. It's a form of economic control. The only question would be, what is the device that's used to burn up excess imagination? Hollywood. That was me. And then I got an interesting reply from HiveMind that said, quote, except instead of, quote, burning it up, I view it as controlling or limiting it. We all believe our imagination is practically non-existent. It's why they tell kids they're using their imaginations all the time. I love this post. So furthermore, I think Nemesis, I call this person, but I think their handle is actually like Nemesis, DEINENEMEI or ESIS. I'm so sorry for butchering that. So Nemesis says, bingo, and Germans used to be known for their inventiveness. This could explain why initiatives for the prevention of imagination, e.g. atheists and skeptics movements, are so promoted here. And I thought that was so beautiful a conclusion to come up with. I was thunderstruck. I was beside myself with this proclamation. So I replied, interesting point. Promoting philosophies that are skeptical are a perfect way to reallocate imaginative energy into a dead end. Indeed, critical thinking is an entire school of thought that's heralded. Could critical thinking be an invisible parasite on a creative imagination? Furthermore, I said I'm going to talk about this on my community tab, and on my YouTube channel. I may make this into a video, which you're now listening to, and I'll give all of you credit for it. So I'll indeed include the Twitter exchange here in the notes. But I thought it was such a powerful back and forth that to think about things like imagination being thwarted at every turn and being invented, by different schools of thought, and think about the things that are out there that are designed to curb your imagination and to make you think that just the idea of adulthood itself, that there's this turning point from childhood to adulthood, and now that you're an adult, you have to lay down childish things like your imagination, and you have to move on to more mature pursuits that adults do. Think how ridiculous that is for a minute. Because it's imagination, it's that place, like I've always talked about, like with Parsons, that we pull down everything that's given us any kind of advancement. You would think that we would be begging people to use their imaginations constantly, but it's the other way around. Why is that? It seems kind of counterintuitive, right? No, it's not. Not at all. There's a couple things here. I like that with the atheist movement. It's a movement of skepticism. And then I started to think about atheism, skepticism, critical thinking. They're all heralded. If someone is a critical thinker, a skeptic, an atheist, someone who demands, the rigorous process, a rigorous scientific process. They're heralded as someone who's logical and should be listened to. But what I've come to realize with critical thinking and anything else, critical thinking is such a destructive way to think. And skepticism and atheism and all of those things. Because the problem is that no matter what the subject is, if you apply critical thinking to it, you're going to be able to rip it to pieces and tear it down and shred it, no matter what it is. No matter what it is. No matter what it is. And case in point is that if you were to take something and you were to make a proclamation about something, we've designed this empire of skepticism and critical thinking to the point that whoever they are, they're only allowing something to be the truth right now, and that it will eventually change, which has been part of my complaint about science this whole time. And how they do it is they have different ways of critical thinking and different lenses that you could look through something. There's the social way, the economic way, the scientific way, the political way. And through all these different lenses that they could apply, these critical thinking schools of thought, and then whatever lever or lens that they decide is in fashion at the time, whatever idea has fallen out of fashion, you would just apply a particular lens to it and you can demolish it. And you would use it through critical thinking. And indeed, critical thinking, in a way, it's a lot like the way a predator thinks. It's very predatory. What you want to do is isolate it, right? That's one of the things about critical thinking you have to do. You have to isolate the problem, and everything's a problem that must be isolated first. And then what you must do is isolate all of the factors that even surround that particular problem, and then slowly but surely break down those things. And you have to do this in a vertical manner, because everything about our world is vertical. You see, it's very much a hierarchy. And for those to even apply these kinds of things I'm talking about, because we have so many layers to thinking now, that unless you are at the right peg in this vertical hierarchy that we've created in this intellectual empire, you don't even have the right to even talk about or question certain subjects or certain things, let alone start the process of deconstructing something. Deconstructionism, that's very popular. Everything, and the ultimate point is to take anything out there that's an idea, put it through the process of critical thinking, deconstructionism, vertical thinking, lateral thinking, any of those thought processes, and in the end what you do is you end up destroying it, and that's the ultimate goal to anything, because there are no longer steadfast truths anymore. There can't be, because everything that we believe now in this moment will not be true in 10 minutes from now or 10 years from now. I've always said this: if you go back to the scientific books from 25 or 30 years ago, they're laughable, and oftentimes they're offensive or they're embarrassing. And certainly they will be 100 years ago. And you go back even further and it becomes more and more ridiculous, right? Truth is very much a moving target, and it's very much a target that is decided upon, that you don't have access to truth. That's another thing too, because you're not, at least most of you I'm talking to, some of you may have the power to have access to the truth, because the truth is something that you can rent. The truth is something that you can observe. But people that make the truth of what is real and what isn't, and what is the truth and what isn't, those are people that you probably don't know. Those are people that you probably will never know. Those are people that are the heads of these bureaucracies, of these universities, of these corporations. They decide what's real. They decide what's ultimately the truth. And that's why I take such joy in things that, like the flat earth. You know, I say this without ridiculing flat earthers, and I'm not ridiculing you at all, because I know that we are in a state, a realm that I don't even bother with it anymore, because I know that I don't have access to the truth. I get to observe the truth like you would a penthouse in pictures from a magazine or from Instagram. But I don't have access to that penthouse, and that's what the truth is. It's a yacht. It's a yacht circling around Corsica, you know, with the right people, the beautiful people. That's what the truth is. And none of us have access to that, and none of us never will. And that's because of this incredibly complex vertical process of thinking. And even if you do all the right things and you're a very, very good upper middle class person, college educated, you know, you make all the right moves, and you're still considered a very successful person, there's still some sort of strange invisible wall where you don't have really access to that thing, the truth. And the closest thing that you'll ever get to the actual truth, if you're a normal person, is if you're sued. And you have the money for a lawyer, and you have the money to actually fight back. Then there's even if you are on the losing end, you get to go into that courtroom, and you actually get a glimpse of that truth, because you're in the presence of someone who has access to those things. You know, a judge in the legal system. So you don't have truth. We're programmed to abandon imagination, and then what imagination we do have is burned down, you know, in a controlled demolition and a controlled fire in places like Hollywood. And I think places like YouTube are now an extension of those kinds of things, where it's, instead of going to the bar and, you know, blowing off some steam, this is doing what I'm doing, and what we're engaging in is the modern equivalent of that they're allowing us to do this. You know, instead of working at the factory and you go and at the end of a hard day and you go have a couple pints with your buddies and you blow it off and you talk about the man and all those things. That's what we're doing right now. And that's where we are in terms of the structure of this system. But imagination, it is so powerful. It's so dangerous that there has to be entire schools of thought like atheism. There has to be entire schools of thought like religion and Christianity and Buddhism, and so it can explain to you, so your mind doesn't wander. It explains to you what is what. You know, it explains to you what is the afterlife and what is life. And I think that's why the We Died in 2012 series, when I say that, it strikes a chord with people, because it's an accidental escape hatch, because all these religions are telling you what is what, that you're alive now and you will be dead, and if you follow this pamphlet or this program, you'll be able to get access to a truth that you don't have access to now. But it's an illusion, because I don't think that there is anything out there that really can constitute the truth or what's real. And the closest thing we have to that is that very thing that is beaten out of us. That we're embarrassed and ridiculed by our peers and by adults, and that's imagination. And this isn't some starry-eyed sort of Disney-esque believe in the stars, you know. We're just a couple rough and tumble kids from, the wrong side of the tracks, and we're believing in a dream. No, this is a very cold reality about imagination. And what does that mean to be alive or to be dead? And what does it mean to be on a flat earth or a round ball that's screaming millions of miles an hour through the universe? And all the time, these schools of thoughts, they all clash with each other. What they're expecting you to do is to pick one. But what if imagination itself is that thing, that resource, and it can be harvested? And what if you decide you refuse to proclaim yourself alive or dead? And it goes back to those comments over and over again. Well, if I'm dead, then this. It's like a if-then-else statement. Then why are my parents dead? Then why don't I don't know, whatever it is. And it's just, you're in that thinking, that vertical thinking, that if it's this, then it has to be this. Maybe there's somewhere else. I don't know. I don't have your answers. I came up with, we died in 2012. That's my contribution. And now this, with my other cohorts on Twitter. I'm doing the best I can here to fight this thing off. Because I think we're dealing with some pretty heady topics that are probably at its core, if we were to really get into this, probably the most dangerous thing out there. And that's rediscovering our potential, the human potential. A little while ago I did that video on the Mandela effect having all the processes and all of the I was going to say props. Actually, yes, all the props. All the processes, all the props, all the ingredients needed for religion. It redefines the past for you. It gives you a line of vertical thinking. There's a hierarchy there. It's perfect. It'd be a great religion. But is that something we all want, or do we want something? Do you want to be free, or do you just want to think differently? Because I'm not entirely sure if there's absolute freedom in thought then, if that, like everything else, would just devolve into decadence and anarchy as well. So perhaps some kind of structure is called for, but it could be something that we define as real. And in that way, I suppose you could call it a religion. But we could make it into something else. Because we're figuring this out on the fly as we speak. So